naši diváci, priaznivci týždňa. Opäť sa vám hlásim z pražského Globsecu a mám tu veľmi zaujímavého a významného hostia, je ním Valery Kavaleuski z Bieloruska pôvodom. Teraz však v Bielorusku nežije a je významnou postavou v exilových štruktúrach Bieloruska. Chcem sa ho spýtať na záležitosti, ktoré súvisia s Bieloruskom vnútorne, ale aj smerom von. S Bieloruskom ako štátom, kde sa potláčajú najzákladnejšie slobody a kde diktátor Lukašenka utláča svoj ľud. A zároveň chcem sa venovať Bielorusku ako sile v rámci vojny na Ukrajine a ako spojencovi Putina. Prechádzame do angličtiny, takže počúvajte nás. Dear Valery, thank you for accepting my invitation. I'm very proud that we have you here. And please tell us, what is it you do? What is your position in the Belarusian exile structures?
Yeah, so I'm part of the democratic movement of Belarus that has formed after protests of 2020 in the wake of fraudulent elections of 2020. And then hundreds of thousands of Belarusians were forced to leave the country. Essentially, it is impossible to have opposition opinion inside Belarus. So many opposition parties or NGOs or independent media were forced to leave Belarus, otherwise they would be arrested. So for 3.5 years I was with Cichanovskej, and now I just launched the news initiative, which is called Euroatlantic Affairs Agency, which works on the international affairs agenda for Belarus to convince our partner governments, international organizations to assume a more assertive and more confident role with regard to democratic Belarus, because we have already seen what it means when Belarus is not democratic, that it becomes a threat to international peace and security and problem for the entire region. And that's why it is in the interest of the entire region, and I think of Slovakia as well, to see that Belarus is democratic, that it is a predictable partner, that it follows international rules, that it can provide security guarantees to Ukraine and to other European neighbors of Belarus, but generally that it becomes part of the European family. And we grew up in the European family. We want to go back in this European family. The problem now is that Lukashenka has established this very dictatorial, very severe regime, which is supported by Russia. And Russia is doing its best to take away Belarus from the European family. They want to make its own realm, its own territory.
What is the internal situation of ordinary citizens in Belarus? Is it something, usually when we think about dictatorships, some people think that, well, you can live a quiet, peaceful life, even in a dictatorship. And some people think, well, why stick out your head and fight for freedom? Because you can just, keep your head low and you will not be harmed. So is it still possible for an ordinary person in Belarus to live a peaceful, ordinary life, regardless of the political situation?
Well, I want to go back to 2020, and exactly 4 years ago, Belarusians were protested in huge numbers. In millions of people were protesting against the regime of Lukashenka, and it was obvious that the society, the people have outgrown the regime, that the regime has become sort of a backwards force that keeps Belarus from growing. And people did not want this anymore. They wanted to get rid of this. They wanted to have free society that allows people to grow professionally, grow personally, and with this to see country growing. Unfortunately, Lukashenko refused to accept the defeat, and he decided to stay in power through repressions, through force. In these 4 years,
even though he lost election,
he definitely lost elections. Cichanovskej won in those elections. But in these 4 years, Belarusians have seen mass repressions, thousands of political prisoners, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians, like about 6% of population left the country because of repressions. We also saw the artificial migration crisis on the EU border that was going through Belarus. These thousands of people from Middle East going through Belarus there. there was also a co-aggression against Ukraine. The Wagnerites, the mercenaries, the worst in the world, came to stay in Belarus. Then Lukashenko agreed to host nuclear weapons of Russia on the territory of Belarus. So you can see how much stress people lived through in these 4 years, and of course they're very tired of this. They would like to return to normal, peaceful life, but it is impossible. While the regime is still there, while the dictatorship is rampant, people always live in the state of fear because any moment they can get a knock on the door, they can be arrested, they can be thrown into prison. It is an absolutely normal situation when a person on the street could be stopped by a policeman and say, like, show me your phone, what you have there. Like, you are subscribed to some YouTube channels or some Telegram channels, and if it is unloyal to the government, to the regime, then person is taken to prison.
Does the state have any AI means or technology means to control the, digital footprint of its citizens?
Indeed. And the regime is using the best sort of technological solutions to suppress people. And this is the other side of the technological innovation, kind of something that is used for development, for people to kind of to open themselves intellectually and professionally. The regime of Lukashenko is using this to suppress people and to track people down and to put them in prison.
Is it buying the technologies from China, for example? Is it that kind of cooperation?
From China, but also from some democratic countries as well. Some technologies come from, like for example, there was an Israeli company that was supplying equipment that helps sort of to crack down the cell phone conversations. And of course it uses the same platforms like YouTube, for example Telegram, that has become famous now, all other means, platforms to spread disinformation, to spread propaganda. Like one of the very popular means of intimidation of population, when people get arrested, KGB or sort of other special services, they intimidate people, they torture people, and they force them to speak sort of confessional videos when people talk against themselves. It's like, I'm guilty, I have committed a crime, kind of please forgive me.
This is something we had here during communism, during the 50s, the monster processes. People were confessing to crimes they didn't commit.
Exactly.
And now they do it even more, and they can spread it even more.
Sometimes it goes on YouTube, sometimes it goes in other platforms, and democratic forces had to work with YouTube also kind of asking them to clean out this thing, because
is
this
it
is
responding?
Absolutely, yes, but still kind of it persists, and this practice still there.
Okay, so it's not getting any better, it's getting much worse in Belarus, as I can see.
It's getting worse. One thing that I would add here is that the mobility of Belarusians has dropped significantly since 2020, and especially after the war started. So it is much harder now to get a Schengen visa to travel to Europe. Neighboring countries have closed many border checkpoints. There are no flights to Belarus or from Belarus to Europe. There are no train connections, only individual cars or buses. And some countries like Latvia and Lithuania stopped receiving cars with Belarusian plates. So Belarusians...
Is it because of security concerns, or...?
They explain this, that there are security concerns and they have to limit the number of Belarusians crossing the border. But eventually this means that hundreds of thousands of Belarusians cannot travel back to Europe. This connection between Belarus and the rest of the European family is getting sort of more challenging. It is much more difficult for people to travel, to get education, even for recreation or for business, or for people-to-people ties. And this is very concerning, that Belarusians have no other choice but to travel eastwards instead of Europe, where they would like to be. This also adds to the stress, of Belarusians who live now in Belarus, and they have very limited opportunities to maintain their ties with Europe.
Yeah, let's dwell on this, because I understand the security concerns, of course, but I also understand the moral side of the question, because when there was the Soviet invasion into Czechoslovakia in 1968. The West accepted refugees from Czechoslovakia. The West didn't close its borders to us, to the generation of my parents, for example. And a great number of people just fled. And now, are you telling me that Europe is closing its borders to ordinary Belarusians?
These opportunities to travel are becoming more and more limited. And in the first place, you have to get a visa. And this has become an ordeal for many Belarusians to get it. It's super expensive. It takes months and months. And then you get a one single entry visa for 15 days. It's very disappointing to people.
It's not even worth it.
Well, I mean, it is. People want it. People badly want it. They have used to travel to the European Union. Before COVID times, Belarus was #1 country in the world in receiving Schengen visas per capita. So this shows how much people appreciated these ties with the European Union, how much they gained from this. This also translated in the sentiment of Belarusians in 2020 on the streets, because they wanted democratic values. They wanted values that are shared with the European Union. So this is a long-term strategy, which is ensuring that mobility helps Belarusians come to democracy in a sort of inorganic way. But now we see that these new restrictions on the mobility of Belarusians, they are playing against the strategic interests of the European Union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do you think it is possible to, control this influx of people who want to travel? Understandably, they want to travel, and I think they have the right to travel. But do you think it is possible to find out if there are, Russian agents, pro-Russian agents among them? Are you talking these possibilities with your European partners as well?
Yeah, well, definitely that there are special services working in all European countries, with our European neighbors as well. So they have their means, they also track this information. We're also there to help because we have necessary databases of that could be helpful in identifying these such agents, such threats to European security. But also, if we look at this rationally and logically, there will be 1,000 people traveling and one of them will be agent. Probably. Maybe yes, maybe no. But because of this one agent, 999 people would not be able to travel. So this is just not commensurate. Yes. And this is a not effective solution, because the damage surpasses the benefits of such policy.
Okay, I tend to agree with you, really, and I also think that must limit the cooperation between the civic organizations and in Belarus and in EU.
That's right, and we do not want that, because institutional cooperation, NGOs, media, it is very important. People-to-people contacts, they give so much benefit to people who still live inside Belarus, sharing information. There are also families torn apart because many Belarusians cannot go back to Belarus now. It is very dangerous, and people would be arrested on the border. Even if they travel, let's say, for humanitarian reasons, for funerals, there were cases when people were arrested because they were going to funerals of their relatives, and they would be thrown to prison immediately.
That's terrible. It's terrible. Something.
It is a terrible totalitarian model that Lukashenka is building now.
It's in Europe, It's the last Cold War dictatorship in Europe.
I would say that, exactly, but also we should be realistic that internal repressions lead to external aggression. So what happens in Belarus does not stay in Belarus anymore. It spills over in international space. This is why Lukashenka is now considered as a threat to international peace and security. And of course it affects immediate neighbors in the first place, but Slovakia is not too far from Belarus, and a very close country in our mentality, in our history, and in our economic ties. So it is very important that Slovaks know about the situation in Belarus and understand why it is important that Belarus is democratic.
Definitely. When we remember a few years back, there was this artificial crisis of refugees, of immigrants. Does anyone have a real, notion of how many people were smuggled this way by Lukashenko, by the regime. How did he do it?
Well,
He flew them from Syria, right?
From Kurdistan, from Middle East, and some from Africa.
He provided the airplanes. He flew these people to Belarus.
First of all, visa support. So people would receive, even from these sort of tricky countries, because kind of we understand that migration flows from that part of the world is very strong towards Europe, and they would easily get visas. They would get on planes. They would have to pay a lot of money for this passage. And those people are actually absolutely innocent people who want to reunite with their families in the European Union, and they would be told, you have safe passage, you have to pay this kind of money, but no problem, you get to the border, you have a safe passage into the European Union. And then when they would come to the border, they would see that the authorities from EU countries, they are not willing to let them in. Yeah. Nevertheless, statistics show that many tens of thousands of migrants crossed into the European Union through the Belarusian territory. Only in Germany, this number is 35,000 of migrants who managed to cross the border. Many traveled as far as UK or France, so not all of them stay in Lithuania or Latvia or Poland. Most of them use this as transit zones to go further into Western Europe. But it's definitely in tens of thousands of people, of migrants who illegally cross the border with the European Union.
Why is he doing it, Lukashenko? Is he using these people as a human weapon against the European Union, against its cohesion, against its societies?
It is definitely weaponization of migration in its worst form. And it's important to mention that dozens of these migrants died on the border in inhumane conditions. We have reports that they were beaten by Belarusian border guards.
We had our reporter there. We published a whole article about that. It was horrible.
So these people are actually victims of migration, not because they wanted to be illegal migrants, but because they were deceived, because they were lied to, and they were led to believe that they will have a safe passage to the European Union. So this is, of course, weaponization, but also for political means. First, Lukashenko earns money on this, but second, he manages to sow sort of discontent in this country, to put pressure on the governments, because it was also costly, let's say, to the authorities in Lithuania and Latvia and Poland. They have to strengthen the border structure against illegal migration. There were incidents when soldiers on the other side, like on Polish side, were wounded. One of them was killed, by one of the migrants. So this is an attempt also to influence the political situation, and to put the price for Poland and Lithuania and Latvia for strong support of democratic aspirations of Belarusians. So Lukashenko is using this for different reasons, and he has succeeded in many respects, you would say.
And let's talk a bit about the role of Lukashenko in the war against Ukraine. From the very beginning, there were concerns that the regime would send its troops right into Ukraine. As you told me before, these concerns are still valid. So are we still afraid that Lukashenko might take part in the war against Ukraine directly?
Well, I think this probability still exists, but it's very, very low. And why it is? Because Belarusian army is an integral part of the society. We have a very monolithic state and society, and the Belarusian army sort of carries the same sentiment about the war. 85% of Belarusians do not want direct participation in the war against Ukraine. And Belarusian military have the same view, that it is not our war. We do not want to die for Putin. There is no motivation, and Lukashenko knows it.
These are not professional soldiers, right? They are
mostly they are conscripts, correct.
Or like ordinary boys, men, young men.
That's right. So they have no interest in fighting Ukraine. And Belarusians know and appreciate Ukraine a lot because this is a very close country for us. Many Belarusians used to take vacations there or have family ties. So it doesn't make any sense whatsoever for Belarusians to fight, even in the context of propaganda that paints Ukraine as this failed state. And so
yes, I wanted to ask you if there is some sort of solidarity with Ukraine among ordinary people in Belarus, because, you know, they also are the victims of dictatorship, and they might see that Ukraine is a victim of Putin.
Indeed. There's a strong level of solidarity, and we have seen this from the very beginning of the war, even in the conditions of repressions, which were rampant back then. On 24th of February 2022, tens of thousands of people went out on the streets. 900 were arrested on the same day. But even after that, people donated for the armed forces of Ukraine. Hundreds of Belarusians went to fight Russians as volunteer fighters.
There is the Belarusian Legion, right?
And the whole regiment, yes, the whole regiment fighting in Ukraine since 2022, so from the very beginning. Actually, there were Belarusians fighting from 2014 there in Donbass and other regions. But now it has grown considerably. Belarusians have helped a lot Ukrainian refugees who were forced to leave the country in the European countries. So this kind of support, this level of support is very broad, it's very expensive, that Belarusians are trying to help Ukraine as much as they can, because if Ukraine falls, Belarus will be next. And it is impossible to imagine that Belarus remains independent and sovereign and national if Russia prevails in Ukraine. So it is in our kind of very core interest to see that Ukraine wins in this war.
Well, the final question I would ask you, how do you view Slovakia? I know that Slovakia is not the biggest and most important country in the world, but we are here in this troubled region together, and I think we have many shared interests. How do democratically minded Belarusians view Slovaks now and their government, for example, which is blatantly pro-Russian?
Well, in the first place, they say that Belarusian and Slovak languages are very close, one of the closest among Slavic nations. So I would leave this to linguists, but
so when I talked here to my colleagues, you
I
understood
could get some words, and of course this is something that we should explore and develop, these cultural ties between our nations. But Slovakia also has a very important historical role because the way you lived through the authoritarian regimes during the Cold War and when in a very peaceful way Czech Republic and Slovakia decided that they want to be independent. This is also for us an example of how these complicated geopolitical issues, national issues, could be resolved. This is also a lesson for Russia. This is how nations should coexist, respectfully towards each other, but also trying to cooperate and develop relations as independent entities. And so this is a success story, you would say, that Slovakia and Czechia decided and implemented this idea of peaceful, normal coexistence.
Well, actually, it's not that successful for Slovakia because we have managed to, politically, to travel eastwards more than Czechia, and that's not successful. But yes, we didn't fight each other. But there was no war.
Bilaterally,
the relations are great.
Yeah, relations are great. And of course, Slovakia has also provided us with an example of how to overcome, how to transition through sort of authoritarian practices in the 90s. That was an excellent example. Also, I would point this in very strongly that Slovakia is part of the European Union. It is part of NATO. And these institutions, they have become the bedrock of peace and security in the region, but also economic prosperity. 20 years after the accession to the European Union, Slovakia is a success story. The way you have developed economically, the way you have developed socially. I think there are many lessons that Belarusians can learn from Slovakia to implement them when the time is right, because Belarus will definitely pursue the membership in the European Union. this is our family and we want to reinstate our role and place in this family, and we will definitely come to Slovakia for advice and for lessons learned, how you overcome some of the difficulties. And of course, political situations sometimes can be frustrating, but it is very important that society stays involved, that it does not become disenfranchised, that people still feel empowered, because it is all about people, and democratic constitution always states that people are the source of sovereignty and power in every democratic nation. So people should.
This is something for us too, because currently we have a very unlucky situation with the government, which has authoritarian tendencies. So I don't know, but maybe we'll see Robert Fico, our prime minister, trying to get in closer contact with Alexander Lukashenka. Mm-hmm. And that will be a sight to see.
Well, of course, we are hopeful that the international isolation of Lukashenka continues, because he has committed a lot of crimes. He has brought a lot of damage to regional security, and he has not drawn any lessons from this. He has not fixed his behavior. There are still repressions, there are still political prisoners. He still participates in the war effort against Ukraine, which brings a lot of havoc and a lot of difficulties for the entire European region. So this, I think, should be taken into account by all national governments, democratic governments in particular. Is this going to help? Is this going to help to fix the situation? Because Lukashenko will feel impunity, that in spite of the fact that he has committed all these cases of bad behavior, he is still welcomed by some of the states.
Actually, Robert Fico accepted the delegation from Belarus just yesterday, because we celebrated 80 years anniversary of the Slovak national uprising, which was against fascism. And well, this is ironic that this government, which is now in power, has parts of it are elements close to fascism or neo-fascism. So, and this government is trying to get into contact with Lukashenka. So, well, we'll see what happens. And just I want to tell you thank you for your efforts, because what you do is really important, not only for Belarus but for Europe too. So, thank you for your time here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor.
Okay, Peťo.